once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our guest author is Maria Ruiz Scaperlanda, author of The Shepherd Who Didn't Run, published by our Sunday Visitor. It's about Father Stanley Rother, martyr from Oklahoma. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here. This is a joy.
Great to have you here. Obviously, people know about Father Stanley from his beatification and his position in a martyr from Oklahoma. Now, tell us a little bit about him. He wasn't martyred in Oklahoma, right?
No, he is comes from a farming family in Okarche, Oklahoma. Grew up in a family of 4 children. It was 5, and they lost a daughter in childhood. But Father Stan grew up just doing the regular farming community life of church, family, farming, and decided that he was called to be a priest, and he went to he finally completed his studies.
He went to San Antonio first, didn't quite make it, right? And then he ended up at Emmitsburg, right?
That's right. In San Antonio, he failed his first year of theology and was sent home.
He had trouble with Latin, right?
It's an incredible thing. Latin was just a tough thing for him to learn. But what happened was that when the Pope invited and asked that...
That was John the 23rd,
John the 23rd asked that the Church of North America send missionaries to Latin America and Central America. It wasn't just the orders that sent people, it was also dioceses. And the Oklahoma diocese, even though it's still a mission territory, they decided to send a mission team down there. And Father Stan had just become a priest when the mission team went down for the first time. So he didn't go right away, but 5 years later he did.
He did, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that all happened. It's interesting too in reading about that, because it sounds like we're used to, people coming from Ireland over the years, the Irish evangelizing the United States, and we all think of South America, Central America, Cuba, these places of being Catholic, quote unquote, countries, and so it seems almost odd to think that there would have been a call in, let's say, the late 50s, 1960, to say North America needs to send priests to Central America.
No, I agree, and I think part of the history is that the Spanish had formed these parishes and dioceses down there, but they had no people staffing them.
They didn't have enough priests, right?
For about 100 years, that parish in Santiago Atitlan was without a priest.
Okay.
That's amazing that it was still there.
And how many people actually were in that locale, and what were the nature of the people who were there?
So all around Lake Atitlan, there are all of Mayan descent, and they're from different
and people are familiar
types.
with that because there's been big documentaries about that.
National Geographic has, if you Google that, you'll get all kinds of information.
So you can understand why he fell in love with the terrain.
Geographically is stunning. It's really, really beautiful. But the people living there are very, very poor. And the particular village where Oklahoma settled to have a mission there was Santiago Atitlan, right on the shores of the lake. It's in the Diocese of Sololá. And like I said, they had not had a priest there for 100 years. So this team of 12 from Oklahoma, not all priests, there were some sisters and lay people like doctors that went down to help with that too.
So how did you get involved with this, and how did you become the one who would write his book?
Quite honest, I feel privileged that I got to write this story. I'm a journalist. I write at home in my pajamas.
I see your articles in the newspaper and on the web, etc.
Yes. So I was a part of the historical commission that gathered all the documents when the diocese introduced a cause for Father Stanley. I came in at the end, and I worked with the Spanish side because Spanish is my first language. So I did looking at the documents, contacting the people in Guatemala.
Completely in Spanish?
Not yet. We're working on that. Yes, we're working on that. That's next.
Okay.
But I worked with the commission, and then after Archbishop Paul Coakley became...
Right, who wrote the foreword to the book.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
He said, Maria, we need a biography. How would you like to write that for us?
Right. So how did you... meet his sister, who is a religious sister. In fact, there's a picture in the book maybe we can show of the family, and you see Father Rother with his sister.
Isn't that amazing?
In the
Two
same
vocations
thing.
from four adult children. That's just
right.
The family has been very, very helpful. Anything that they have, they've turned over to the Archdiocese. I can't imagine how they must feel, you know, to have their brother be declared blessed.
Right.
But Sister Marita has been a wonderful part of the book, because I made sure she read it when it was completed.
Right.
And I gave a copy also to Tom. But Tom is he's the farmer. He and his wife Marty still live on the Rother farm, where their parents and grandparents.
So when she went through it, and I'll go through some of what she wrote in the introduction here in a second, did she have any particular comments? Were there anything where she said,
she had a few things.
That sort of was right, but maybe it's a little more this way?
She had a few things. It was more like, like correct a story that I had heard.
Right.
Or I think it'd be good if you told this part. And she gave me a lot of information from the times that she visited Father Stan when they were both adults, and she got to know him.
About being down there too.
She got to know him as a pastor of the people of Santiago.
Just kind of see him in a different way than just her brother growing up.
She spent a couple of summers down there as a volunteer for her order. She's from the Adorers of the Blood of Christ, and they had people at their school, Holy Trinity, which, by the way, in this little German farming town, that school is still there.
Right, I saw that.
But at the time when they were growing up, there were a lot of adorers.
Yeah, it's interesting because it was a Catholic German
community.
Right,
okay. they brought him down.
Now, in the introduction, she writes about her brother being ordained in '63, and she points out that his ordination card was, "For myself, I am a Christian. For the sake of others, I am a priest." What did that mean to you when you first read that and then saw that lived out in his life as you worked on his book?
I think it's such a perfect place to start to talk about what the virtues of Father Stan brings to the church, not just in Oklahoma, but to the church universal. He was a service type of guy, so he learned all the good virtues of farming and working hard and all of that, but also service to others. And so when he becomes a priest and he goes down there and works at the mission, you see that side of him be a big part.
He really connects with the people working, and talk about the red earth of where he grew up.
Yes, very good. The red earth of Oklahoma,
Right.
So really, honestly, I think it's like God doesn't waste any details. And all those parts of him that made him a good Oklahoma farm boy were put to use in this Santiago Atitlan village
in Guatemala. So it's interesting how God uses all of the things in our past, even though we don't see them until later, how he comes into play. What's also struck me, and you started to allude to this in the sense of his family, the fact that his sister writes, grandparents live within a mile, many uncles, aunts, first, second cousins within 3 or 4 miles, with a church and schoolyard a little beyond 3 miles. And here's a man who grew up in this insulated, kind of supported situation, who took himself out of that on his own accord, and took himself and put himself in another situation where in some ways, from our perspective, he was totally isolated.
Because he felt a call from God. And that's one of the things that I find so inspiring about him, that he stuck to that. You know, he fails at this one seminary, goes to the bishop, and the bishop says, "What do you want to do?" And he said, "I still feel called to be a priest." I mean, that takes a lot of courage. So,
right, because he was kind of telling, maybe you should think about something else.
Exactly. And I think the fact that he said, I will do it again. He worked hard.
What's interesting too, in the section she had, which about "Come Follow Me," she said that only after I recently read from the diaries that he kept in those first few years in the seminary did I realize how the religious practices from his home life continued to be so important to him. And I think that's important for a lot of people out there who sometimes think that your kids are not getting it.
Absolutely.
Or you're doing this stuff, and then for a period of time they seem like they're drifting away from the faith, and you're thinking, oh gee, how did I fail? It's really important, and you don't really realize how much of an impression, positive or negative, you may be making on your children. Right?
That was really a funny moment, because she didn't even know he had diaries. And
Have you seen the diary?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And I was going over things with her in one interview, and I said, and I read this in his diary, and she said, wait, Stan had diaries? And so I brought them out and showed them to her. Right. And she was just stunned that he had kept these things, and they're very brief.
Right.
Very farmer-like. You know, he always mentions the weather. He mentions what he's been serving, like in which way I helped in this, or I went to reestablish the grotto at the seminary, that kind of thing. But he also says in little short sentences, prayed a rosary for Aunt so-and-so who's having a hard time. I went to a holy hour for so-and-so that I heard. He continued to be very connected
Thinking
to
of
his...
the other.
Yes, and he was very connected to his family and friends in Oklahoma, but bringing all those practices with him. You know, Sister Marita talks of them after supper at night, kneeling by their chair and saying the rosary as a family.
So did you think in your research and writing the book that those are the things that helped sustain him when he was in Guatemala?
Absolutely, absolutely. And he was very devoted to Our Lady. And he talks about that in the seminary brief statements where he talks of going to the grotto. But having Our Lady be a part of how he ministered was a big part of his life. But definitely all the practices. He brought all of that with him.
Well, it's interesting, too, because this is a classic on one level. You read about the book, and obviously you know he's martyred. Obviously he's dealing with a hardship. He's dealing with very poor people. He's in a situation where people he knows are getting killed, and he still faces up to that. But she tells a story about how he was always positive and obviously enjoyed his work, except for the time he shared his woes about trying to keep his elementary school religion class under control. Would you please give me some ideas how I could try? Since as a teacher myself, I had some experience in that area. I shared a few hints with him. Now that was kind of his experience more in the state, but it's kind of interesting that was what he struggled with.
Yes, I think that did not come natural to him. The wanting to get to be with them, and he made a practice of, for example, going to Sunday supper with the Mayan families that he was ministering, just like he had Sunday supper with his own family.
And as you mentioned in the book, you alluded to the idea that he had some difficulty with Latin, but yet he went down there and he learned Spanish and the local language, right? You
know, I think for me that was a miracle in itself, because this man that struggled with learning Latin goes down there and is sent to language school. And first of all, he kind of got Spanish, but then as they worked on Zutihel and the team worked on making it a written language, which it wasn't when they first arrived, the goal was so that they could communicate, but also so they could celebrate Mass and more than anything, read the Gospels to them in their own language. And Father Stan became completely fluent. I mean, to the point where all the other missionaries around the lake from different places that I talked with or that I read the interviews, they were jealous.
Did you go and visit that locale?
I did. I did.
And what was your experience there?
You know, it made all the difference because seeing where he was and meeting the people with my own eyes, it's a holy place in terms of seeing how the faith has flourished there. And you talk about it near the end of the book, the idea of where his heart is there in many ways, obviously. It's to the point where literally the community, when he was killed, asked the family for his heart to remain there. And I can't imagine, I'm a mother of 4 adult children, I can't imagine answering that question, but it says a lot about what his parents knew about him. And that is that his heart truly did belong to the people there. And they left it, literally. And his body came back to Oklahoma, but his heart is still there. And would you say he's still alive for them in many ways? In every sense of the word. I think, I talked to one sister who was very funny because she said, she would just listen, ask me how the cause was going and all of that. And then she says, that's really nice. Then she adds, but you know, we know he is a saint. We already asked for his intercession. And I see it as such a natural thing. They came to him for everything, small and big things. when he was alive, and now they still come to him for his intercession.
His sister writes, so obvious to me was his gentleness, his truly being for others. This is when she was down there with him, not just doing for them, and his attentiveness and responsiveness to them when he was locked in conversation, and just how much he cared, and I guess being Christ for them in many ways. Right?
I think his gift of presence is one of the virtues that I feel very touched by. The fact that when he was with those families, whoever came up that needed help, he was completely present to them.
Right.
And I think that's what Sister Marita is mentioning there, that she got to witness that, and that is a real gift.
Right. Now, in a situation that happened July 28, 1981, the shepherd who didn't run, obviously when we say he didn't run, what do we mean by that? How did that title come about?
Being an American priest, he felt a little more safe than the other people that were being put on death lists at the time. But when it came to the fact that he and his associate pastor were put on a death list,
did they let you know that you're on the list? Is that how it works?
Kind of like the rumor
gets around,
mill,
gets
right?
around.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're coming for you, that kind of thing.
Right.
That made him be more protective of his associate pastor, who, by the way, was a different Mayan.
It might have been an easier target in his mind.
Absolutely. So he brought him to Oklahoma, and he was in Oklahoma for a few months, and really discerning if he was going to go back, knowing that he was on a death list and very likely would be killed.
And he had a catechist who worked for him who had been...
It had just happened before they left. One of his closest friends and catechists that he had trained and was training the other people in the parish, very active, he was taken right from his from the rectory entrance.
Right.
And Father Stan witnessed the whole thing, and so he knew this was a real threat.
Right, but he went back anyway, and that's...
I love that he said, I promised them I would be back for Holy Week.
Right. And that's what he did.
Yes, he did. And he did go back in 1981 for Holy Week. But in his letters, he continued to write about what the situation was like. And it is from one of his letters that he says, the shepherd cannot run at the first sign of danger.
Right.
And that meant everything to the people. That he came back to be with them, knowing what kind of violence and threats he was facing.
Right, and as the Holy Father said, to have the smell of the sheep, and then not only to be there, but to then stand with them at the sheep gate and protect them as best he can from the wolves.
That's very good. That's one of the things that I've been praying with, is that he truly did smell like that.
Right, exactly. Now, so 1:30 in the morning, wearing civilian clothes and ski masks, 3 Spanish-speaking Latinos, non-indigenous people. 2 things. Why do you make the point that they weren't indigenous people? You also make the point that they were familiar enough with the parish complex to know the precise location of the pastor's upstairs bedroom.
I'm just pointing out pretty much, I'm a journalist, so I'm pointing out what we know. They were too tall to be Zutugil. The Zutugil are short in stature. The Latinos have a mix of the Spanish and the indigenous blood, and so they're taller.
Okay.
And we know that these 3 were taller men, and they were familiar enough to go to where his bedroom was and not find him there. And so then they found a young man that was being protected in the rectory, the brother of the associate pastor, actually. And they said, where is he?
Francisco.
And made him take them to the room where Father Stan had been sleeping.
Right. And then Father Stan, was it Father Stan and the men who told him, the other gentleman, Francisco, to leave and go lock yourself in, so to speak?
And it's important to note that, and this is one of the ways that we can say he was a martyr, is that he did not call out for help. He had defensive wounds in his hands. He protected himself as best he could.
They heard some sort of violence going on in the room.
But he did not call out for help. Because he knew there were sisters in the complex in a different part, and there were other people staying there. He had a volunteer.
He was afraid if they came to help him, they might be killed or also kidnapped as well. And that's the point, too. The assailants wanted to kidnap him, turn him into one of the missing, but he would have none of that. and Father Stan knew they would torture and ultimately kill him, I guess, anyway, and he never called for help.
I think as a priest, he knew how important it was that they did not take him for torture. I think, you know, it's a very human side to realize that he took seriously the seal of the confessional, and also that his people would be without a pastor, and that's not a minor thing. He didn't want them wondering, you know, where he just disappeared, desaparecido, like the other ones.
And maybe, like you said, they would torture him to try and get information about other people. And again, in a confessional way, there might be people who have told him things that no one else would know.
So he was committed. He had, that's a good point. Even in letters, he told his dad, would ask, what are you going to do? And he said, Dad, I will not let them take me.
Okay. So the name of the book is The Shepherd Who Didn't Run, from Father Stanley Rother, Martyr from Oklahoma, and we can all be proud as Americans that he's one of our own.
Absolutely.
Now, you also have another book, which I wanted to mention in our closing minutes, Edith Stein, The Life and Legacy of Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. Now, this is published by our friends at Sophia. Was this something you decided to write? Sophia come to you? How did you come about this book?
They asked me to write it, and it was originally written a few years ago, and then Sophia just reissued it this past August. I love Edith Stein. If the gift of Father Stan is how regular a guy he was, Edith Stein was so brilliant that it's almost intimidating to get into her. But another martyr, yes. So
So in comparing those books and reading through, besides the intellect, where would you say, because ultimately they're both basically martyrs, you know, for the faith in the way, certainly the way it's thought of today, what would be similar about them?
That's a great question. Both trusted God with their entire being, to the point of knowing that no matter what happened, as long as they were saying yes to what God put in front of them, that is pretty strong, confident trust, and it's provoking as a Catholic to think that I am called to that same kind of confident trust. I don't think I'll be called to be a martyr, but I definitely am called to say yes to what God is putting in front of me today.
It's interesting, too, in juxtaposing the two, because here he is, he leaves Oklahoma, goes to Guatemala, and is working among the people. She ends up taking herself out of the academic world, so to speak, and become a Carmelite, not only becoming
and a cloistered
not only a sister or religious, but actually going into a cloister.
It is amazing. And it was her superior who asked her to write her life and to keep writing while she was in the cloister. She truly wanted to be dedicated to her life to prayer and to service in that way.
Right. Now, as far as you mentioned that you had an affinity for her, I mean, what was that affinity, and did it grow stronger in writing the book?
I have to say it was intimidating. She was pretty brilliant in all the big things that she wrote. But when I read her letters, her books of letters, I just fell in love with her heart. She has a very tender heart, and her sense of divine providence in all of her life really struck me. So she became a friend.
Right. So you talk about, and obviously in the book you deal with her life, but you also talk about here right in the title, legacy. What do you see as the legacy of Edith Stein today?
Edith Stein, being a woman, is of great importance to the Catholic Church in America. Okay. I think we get sidetracked by so many political things about what it means to be a woman and a Catholic woman. Edith Stein had it right. Her dedication to God, to prayer, and to the woman's heart being expanded by her service to the faith and community and her family. She has a lot to teach us about what it really means to be a Catholic woman today.
Right, but I guess people will have to read the book. Just before we go, are you writing or working on another book as we speak? Or?
I'm discerning what's next, yes.
Okay, well, we don't want you to give anything away, but when it comes out, let us know. We're
Absolutely.
happy to have you back.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Maria Ruiz Scaperlanda. And the book is The Shepherd Who Didn't Run, Father Stanley Rother, Martyr from Oklahoma. He's been in the headlines. If you want to find out the whole story, this is the book. And also, while we're at it, we also wanted to touch base on this new edition of the Edith Stein, The Life and Legacy of St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, very popular here as well on EWTN, published by Sophia. Both of these are available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time right here on Bookmark.